Hey YouTube, it's Charlie from Reader Turned Writer. Today I am sharing the books that I read in October, my wrap-up, and I also wanted to share my TBR for November. I really enjoyed putting these two lists together into one video. I think they go well together, so I'm going to continue that. And of course I have my bullet pages, so I will just jump over to those and list out the books that I read last month and let you know what I thought of them, and then just give you an idea of what my reading month in November will be like. I will start with my favorite books of the month. They were Murmur of Bees by Sofia Segovia, The Proud Shall Stumble by Gerald Lund, and A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Bridget Kemmerer. And now I'll just jump into the books that I read in the order that I read them in. The first book I finished was The Murmur of Bees by Sofia Segovia, and I rated this 4 stars. This is an historical fiction set in Mexico during their civil war and the Spanish flu epidemic. It was a beautifully written, slow burn book that left me with a lot of emotions to work through. The book is very character driven and kept my interest despite the slowness of the plot at times. I loved the characters and the historical aspect and itched to get back into it every time I had to walk away. The magical aspect kept things interesting, and I felt it really added to the underlying tension. The writing style wasn't my favorite. There were really long inner monologue passages that I sometimes skimmed. I prefer straightforward writing styles, but the style did fit the story and highlighted the emotions of certain scenes. If you enjoy historical fiction and magical realism and enjoy character-driven stories, then this is a great read. And then I read A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Bridget Kemmerer, and I rated this 4 stars. This is the sequel to A Curse So Dark and Lonely, and I thought it was a really fun read and a really great sequel. It also has quite the cliffhanger for the next book, the third and final one. I really liked the focus on Gray and the new character Liamara and the friendships that are formed. The plot was slightly predictable for me, but it still had held surprises, and I didn't mind the predictability. I didn't love the way Harper and Wren were handled, and while I was expecting the ending, I didn't necessarily love that either. They weren't badly done or poorly written, they just were not to my taste. Overall, I thought it was a great addition to the series, and I can't wait for the next one to come out. Then I read Never Say Never by Lisa Wingate, and I rated this 4 stars. I really loved Before We Were Yours, and when I saw this book by the same author at a thrift store, I had to try it. When Kai and Aunt Danetta cross paths during a hurricane, they end up changing each other's lives. There is romance, suspense, and Christ-like service all throughout, and there is a Christian emphasis. It's not overly strong, but they do talk about faith in God and things like that throughout the book. I enjoyed the book for the most part, though the middle did slow down for me a little bit. I didn't love it as much as Before We Were Yours, but I did like it, and I do want to read more books by Lisa Wingate. My writing craft book of the month was Mastering Suspense, Structure, and Plot by Jane K. Cleland, and I rated this 3 stars. I was really interested in the suspense part of this book the most, and it did have good information in it, and I was glad that I read the book, though ultimately I found myself wanting more from it. I wish they had focused more on the suspense and tightened up the book, going more in depth there rather than trying to touch on a lot of surface level topics, some of which felt a little unrelated to the rest of the book to me. Overall, it's not a bad book to read, and I learned some from it, but it's not my favorite book on writing. And I am doing a video on that this month, so you can keep an eye out for that. Then I read the casebook by Arthur Conan Doyle, and I rated this 4 stars. I have enjoyed all of the Sherlock stories, and this was no exception. It was one of my least favorite of the short story collections, not for any particular reason, mostly just because not any of the stories really stood out to me. But they were still good, and I still really enjoyed reading them. Then I read Illuminate by Amy Kaufman, and I rated this 4 stars. I had a lot of fun reading this one, though it was a different experience. I don't read a lot of sci-fi, but I usually enjoy it when I do. The format was cool and different, like I said, though at times it felt more like I was deciphering than reading, and I have to admit that sometimes I got lost. I didn't know what was going on. Though by the end, I did think that the format fit the story really well. I felt like it fit the story better at the ending than it did at the beginning, especially as we see more from the AI's perspective. I also really loved the twist at the end, and I did leave the book excited to read the next one. I do have a reading vlog that I am going to be posting on that sometime in the next couple of months. Another nonfiction book I read this month was Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, The Story of Little Women and Why It Still Matters by Anne Boyd Rio. and I rated it 4 stars. While I have read Little Women as an adult and enjoyed it, I never read it as a child, so I don't have a lot of nostalgia for it. But I did end up really enjoying this look at Little Women's history and the influence that it has had. The book is very accessible and very well researched. It did a very good job of keeping my interest, and I learned a lot. The first half was particularly interesting as it detailed Alcott's life and the publication of Little Women originally. While I found the second half interesting for the most part, there were sections that seemed to meander a bit. There were also a lot of lists of things like adaptations, people's opinions on the books, stuff like that, and I found myself skimming those most of the time. Overall, this is a great read if you love Little Women. My read aloud for the month was The Search. This is an Avatar: The Last Airbender graphic novel, and I rated it 5 stars. This ended up being our read aloud after we decided not to finish Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. We all got kind of bored with that one, so we decided to set it aside and try a different book. We recently watched the Avatar series and the kids loved it. This graphic novel is the story of Zuko searching for his mother. The story is fun and well done. The characters are the ones that we've come to love in the TV series, and the graphics are great. I loved this one when I first read it, and it was really fun to share it with my kids, and they all really liked it too. Well, my older two. My younger one doesn't really sit and listen to our read aloud once we're done with the picture books. She's only 2, but my 4-year-old and my 6-year-old loved the TV series, and they loved this graphic novel. My reread for the month was Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, and I rated it 5 stars. It was also my main audiobook for the month. I think it's something like 55 hours, so it was all that I listened to this month. I love Oathbringer. I especially love the ending. It might be my favorite ending by Brandon Sanderson that he's written so far, and I love Brandon Sanderson endings, so that's really saying something. I really enjoyed rereading it. I really needed to because I had forgotten a lot of stuff, and I am really ready for Rhythm of War to come out next month. Then I read The Proud Shall Stumble by Gerald Lund, and I rated this 5 stars. This was the 4th in the Fire and Steel series by Gerald Lund, a series that spans the First and Second World War. This series has gotten progressively better for me as I've read further in it. I liked but didn't love the first book, but by the time I finished this 4th one, I just am absolutely loving the series. The more I get to know the characters, the more I love them. Emily is by far my favorite, though I was surprised by how much I loved Frank and Celeste in this one as well. In the previous books, I didn't love the American family. There were still parts in this one that dragged for me, but I was riveted anytime we got to read about Celeste and Frank and their little family. I also loved the history in this one. Learning more about the atmosphere leading up to the Great Depression was so interesting. I also thought the title was appropriate in so many ways. Another newer release that I read this month was Burn by Patrick Ness, and I rated it 4 stars. I enjoyed this one, but it wasn't my favorite Patrick Ness book. I loved the dragon aspect and the world building around the dragons. The prophecy world building for me was on the fence. I didn't really understand it all the way, and I think that was the point, but I didn't love that. I also actually really liked the main characters and quite a few of the side characters, and the book starts off with quite a bit of tension that doesn't really let up throughout the book. But it still wasn't my favorite. I'm not exactly sure why I didn't just devour it with the fast pace of the book and the tension and everything, but I found myself having to force myself to continue at parts, especially after the first 50% of the book. One thing that contributed to that, I think, was how many points of view there were. There were some that I was simply bored during. The other thing was pacing. Like I said before, there was a lot of tension throughout and plenty of build-up, but the middle of the book felt like the ending, but then it wasn't, and I had a hard time reading the second half. Overall, though, if you enjoy Patrick Ness, you'll probably enjoy this one. It very much has his feel to it. I did want to give a content warning here. There is implied sex and some overt sexual moments. There's also abuse and violence against gays and persons of colors. It's set in the 50s, and so there's a lot of prejudice against the characters, and other characters do not act appropriately with them. Then I read Lights, Camera, Murder by Nikki Haverstock, and I rated it 3 stars. This was a really fun, cozy mystery read. I really liked the main character, though I have to admit I liked her a lot more near the end than the beginning. In the beginning, she drinks a whole lot, and it's obvious that she has kind of a drinking problem, and I didn't love that. But I did love how real her struggle with and her love of writing felt. The pacing of the book did feel a little off for me. The beginning has a lot of setup, and I actually forgot that I was reading a murder mystery book at one point. The story really started to get interesting for me around the 25% mark, and then the murder didn't happen until about 50% of the way through the book. Despite that, I did stay really interested in the story, and I think it was because I did like the characters so much. I finished the month with Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys, and I rated it 4 stars. This was an intense, fairly fast-moving historical fiction following the sinking of the submarine Wilhelm Gustloff. I don't know how you say the name of that boat, but it was full of refugees from Germany at the end of World War II. I had a harder time with this one at first because there are quite a few different points of view and the book moves between them fairly quickly, only staying with each person a couple of pages before switching. Once I figured out who was who, though, I was really captivated throughout the book. The stories of each person were captivating, that's the best word for it, and I was really rooting for them, except for Alfred. I didn't really like his character. This wasn't an easy book to read, but it was one that really made me feel and think, and I learned a lot. So there were the books that I read in October. I had a pretty good reading month with some really fantastic reads. Now on to the books I plan to read next month. I have 36 books on my 2020 TBR, so I need to read 3 books from that each month. In September, I am planning on reading Where Am I Now by Mara Wilson. This is a memoir by the child star that played Matilda and a lot of other roles. I always loved the movies she was in, especially Matilda, and I am excited to learn more about her. The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This is a really popular one that I've had on my radar for a long time. I am not sure how I will feel about it as I'm reading it because I've heard there is a strong emphasis on atmosphere, which isn't my personal favorite, but I do want to try it and just see what it's like. And A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. And this is my first V.E. Schwab book, and I actually don't really know much about it except that it's fantasy. And honestly, it's just so overdue to read a V.E. Schwab book that I'm just really excited to read a book by her. I've heard so many good things. I have 2 read-alouds this month, both of which my daughter Ashton got for her birthday last month. They're both shorter books, shorter children's chapter books, so I think that we'll be able to read both of them in November. The first is The Princess in Black by Shannon Hell. This is a chapter book about a princess who has a second identity wearing black as a superhero. We've actually read the last book in this series and my kids loved it, so I'm excited to read the first one with them. And then Mrs. Piggle Wiggle by Betty McDonald. And this one is just one that I've heard a lot of good things about. A lot of parents recommend it as being silly and fun, and I think that especially my 4-year-old will really enjoy it, which I am excited for. My nonfiction read is Art and Fear by David Bales. This is a book for creatives recommended to me by Nikki Haverstock on her YouTube channel, which I'll link down below. And I'm excited to read it because I think it will have a lot of useful information in it. My classic read this month is Sanditon by Jane Austen. I don't actually know how to pronounce the name of that, but this was her final novel and she left it unfinished. But then I believe her niece finished it for her. If it wasn't her niece, it was someone else. I've heard good things about this one and that you can't tell where Jane Austen left off and the new author picked up, which is really fun to me. Another Jane Austen novel to read. It's my last one before I have read all of the books by Jane Austen, and I've loved them all, so I'm hoping I enjoy this one as well. The prompt this month for the rereadathon is an underrated book. I am rereading A Face in the Shadows by Susan Evans McLeod. This is a historical fiction looking at a girl from France attending BYU right after World War II. She has to work through her feelings from the war as she is faced with a German professor. Susan Evans McLeod is an LDS author, which is why she's not talked a lot about on BookTube. But even among the LDS culture, I feel she is an underrated author. I've enjoyed all of her books that I've read because she has a lot, and this one has been one of my favorites so far. My main audiobook this month is going to be either The Bear and the Nightingale or Renegades. I have both audiobooks on hold in my library, and so I'm hoping to get at least one of them before the month is over and have time to listen to it. The new release I want to read, I'm like so excited I'm giddy here, is Rhythm of War, and this is the 4th Stormlight book by Brandon Sanderson. It's coming out November 17th, and I seriously am so excited. I cannot wait. The Stormlight Archive is my favorite series by Brandon Sanderson, and I'm currently listening to Oathbringer, or at the time that I'm recording this. By the time it goes up, I'll be finished probably, but I love Oathbringer, I love the Stormlight Archive, and I just can't even wrap my head around the fact that in 2 weeks I'm going to get the 4th Stormlight book. Moving on, for the series I want to make progress in, I want to read the fifth of the Fire and Steel series, Out of the Smoke by Gerald Lund. This is an historical fiction set during the First and Second World Wars. I am really enjoying the series. I'm learning a lot and I can't wait to continue it. I keep a list each month of the books and ebooks I own but haven't read. My goal is to read all of the books on my list from January by the end of this year. An ebook from that list that I want to read this month is The Secret of Lost Stones by Melissa Payne. I don't know a lot about it, but I do think it has kind of like an eerie feel to it. A physical book from my list that I want to read is Arch Enemies by Marissa Meyer, the second Renegades book. In order to read it, though, I also need to read Renegades, so both of them are on my TBR this month. I don't own Renegades, but I do own Arch Enemies, so I'm going to get Renegades from the library and then read Arch Enemies, which I own. I also want to read Tuesdays at the Castle by Jessica Day George because I also own the third in that series and I want to read the second and third next month so I can check that off my January list. I also have been wanting to read some books by fellow author-tubers. One that I am planning to read this month is Out of My League by Sarah Sutton. I have really enjoyed her YouTube channel and I'm really excited to try one of her books. They are more lighthearted contemporary romance YA books and I think it'll be really fun. I would also love to read The Enemy by Sarah Adams, which is a rom-com, adult rom-com, if I can squeeze it in. I'm at 15 books, so it's going to be hard, but I have loved her books in the past, and this one was recently released, and I bought it right away because I loved her books so much in the past, and I am really excited to read it. So there you have it. My goal is to read between 10 and 12 books, and I have 15 to choose from. I actually might just try and read all 15 this month, but we'll see how busy, crazy things get with my other goals. What was your favorite book that you read in October? And what are you most excited to read in November? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to chat about books or get book recommendations from you. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe for lots of writing content and bookish content. Thank you so much for watching my video. I will see you in the next one.